Child's pose, Bālāsana in Sanskrit, has numerous benefits. It can help to stretch the ankles, the thighs, the hips. It's good for digestion, and also it's calming on the mind. This list goes on. And we have Richard here with us today, and he'll be demonstrating some of the variations, the modifications for child's pose. And welcome, Richard.
Thank you.
Glad that you're here.
Thank you.
Let's get started. From a seated position, come into table. And what we usually think of as child's pose without any kind of modifications or props is simply bringing the big toes together, the knees wider than the hips, sitting back on the heels, and the forehead touching down to the floor. Now, if you're trying this pose out and it doesn't feel good for you, you can start to explore different variations using different props. And if you don't have the props that I'm using, you can substitute blankets, pillows, rolled towels. You can get really creative here. So Richard, I'll have you press up to table. And one of the first things that you can do for yourself is supporting your legs by placing a blanket underneath the legs. So come off the mat to your right for a moment. Good. And then placing a blanket down here for comfort, coming back into table, bringing the big toes together, knees wider than hips, and then sitting back on the heels. This starts to support the knees, forehead touches down. Now, if you're finding that there's still a discomfort here in the ankles, coming back up to table, taking a rolled towel or blanket and placing that underneath the ankles. Good. Big toes touch, knees go a little wider, and sitting back. And from here, we start to experiment, taking a moment to feel and maybe noticing if there's too much compression in the knee joint, or if you need a little more space between your hips and heels, you can press up again. And this time, placing a blanket between your hips and heels or behind the knee joint, whichever feels better for you. Knees go wide, sitting back on the support. You can also use a small bolster here instead of this blanket, the rolled towel, finding space here between the hips and heels. The next thing that you want to take care of is making sure that you're watching your spine. So if you find that you're straining here in the neck or that you're straining here in the back, you might need a block underneath the forehead. So Richard, lift your forehead up for a moment, placing the block here. And that depends, the height depends up to you and your body and where you're at with your body at the given time that you're practicing this. So I can see here for Richard with the block, the curve is actually a little too strong, so he's okay having his head down to the floor. So we're going to move the block, bring his head back down, and you can see here this curve in the neck is supported, his head is comfortably relaxed, and this is helping to elongate his spine. From here, if you'd like to make this more of a pose that involves more engagement, you can come up on the fingertips, lifting the forearms and the elbows, and imagine that there is a tennis ball here underneath your palms, and then widening the hands a little bit wider and broadening across the collarbones. An external rotation on the head of the arm bones. Good, and the heart remains relaxed down towards the floor, and the hips are relaxed down towards the heels. Take a few breaths here. Another full breath. Taking a moment to feel where you're at. Okay, now keeping the forehead down, trying out another variation for the arms. You can relax the palms down, the elbows down, and bring the palms together. And either staying here with the arms and elbows can relax wider than the hips. Wider than the shoulders. You can either keep the hands here on the floor or you can bring them to rest between the shoulder blades towards the neck. But make sure you're not adding pressure here on the head. So you want to take care that this is comfortable for you. This helps to open up underneath the arms. You might feel a slight stretch opening across the upper chest, and a few breaths here. And remember, if this is straining for you or if you're on a block, this variation here might not be available to you yet, so to not press through any kind of pain or discomfort in the body. We're trying to find a place where you're comfortable and you're able to hold a position and breathe with ease. And now you can relax the hands back down to the floor. Now noticing this position here, the knees are bent. And if you want to take a variation where you're not involving compression on the knees, you can take a variation where you're lying straight down on the belly. So come up to table. We'll move all the props. Good, and go off to your side. Good. And then from here, building a different variation where you can take a big bolster. Yep, thanks. Good. And then you can take a small bolster rolled blanket, placing it next to the big bolster, creating an upside down letter T. Coming through table and checking in that your hip crease where your thigh bone and hip meet go onto the small bolster, and the torso rests on the big bolster. You can rest on your cheek. And then your knees can stay on the ground. You can always put an extra light blanket underneath, and also placing a rolled blanket underneath the ankle. So lifting your feet. Good. And you would preset that for yourself. Good. How does that feel, Richard?
Good.
Good. Okay. A few breaths here. This is also a variation that can be taken for restorative yoga, for child's pose. And if you're resting on your cheek, you can always switch cheeks, making sure that you're staying even on the neck. Good. So now you want to be cautious here. If you are working through any kind of neck discomfort where you can't stay on one cheek or the other, you can always bring your forehead to center. And in that case, because this bolster is longer, he would need to scoot forward. Yep, and we would move the small bolster, so kind of press up to a table for a second. Good. Coming forward, and then you can rest your forehead on the blocks, keeping your nose in between so you can still comfortably breathe. And the forehead relax on blocks with maybe a towel between your forehead and the block for comfort. And you want to think of this as the massage table, right? So we're keeping our neck centered, checking in on the rest of the body. Good. Few more breaths here. The arms resting comfortably by your side, and just noticing how this feels. And when you're ready to come up, you can curl the toes under, press down through the hands, the elbows point back, inhale to come up. Good, and move the props, and then come back to a comfortable seat. Facing forward. Good. So if you have any questions for us on the variations of child's pose, you can ask in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.